Imagine finding an ordinary object in your home that, over time, begins to reveal something far more sinister. An old mirror, bought innocently, starts reflecting things that shouldn't be there. Day by day, you notice more disturbances, more strange events. And soon, you realize this isn't just a superstition or a coincidence. The mirror holds something evil, something that was unleashed the moment it entered your home. Get ready for a story of a curse that goes beyond simple ghost stories. The terror is reflected, and with every glance, it gets closer. It was an ordinary summer afternoon in the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon. Lucy, a bright and imaginative 7-year-old, was playing in her pastel-painted bedroom, filled with stuffed animals and books. Her father, James, a software engineer, sat at his desk just down the hall, listening to the faint hum of Lucy's laughter. As Lucy twirled around in her princess costume, something caught her eye flicker in the antique floor-length mirror that stood in the corner of her room. The mirror had been a family heirloom passed down from her grandmother. Its ornate golden frame always seemed slightly out of place among the modern furniture. Curious, Lucy walked over and gazed at her reflection, only to notice something unusual. There, just over her shoulder, was the faint outline of another child. "Hello?" Lucy whispered, her small voice barely audible. To her surprise, the boy in the mirror smiled. He appeared to be about her age, with messy blonde hair and a pale complexion. "Who are you?" she asked, her curiosity outweighing any sense of fear. The boy didn't answer but tilted his head as if studying her. Lucy, believing this to be a delightful new game, introduced herself. "I'm Lucy. Do you want to play with me?" The boy nodded, and Lucy clapped her hands with excitement. From that moment on, Lucy's games became less about her stuffed animals and more about her new friend in the mirror, whom she decided to name Tommy. When James came to check on her, he found her sitting cross-legged in front of the mirror, chatting animatedly. "Daddy, meet Tommy. He's my new best friend," she announced, beaming. James glanced at the mirror and saw nothing but their reflections. Smiling, he ruffled Lucy's hair and said, "Tommy, huh? Well, make sure he's nice." Lucy giggled. "He is. He says he's been waiting a long time to have someone to talk to." The comment made James pause for a moment, but he quickly dismissed it as childhood imagination. That night, as Lucy fell asleep, James stared at the mirror from the doorway. The room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a star. Yet, something about the mirror unsettled him, as though it didn't quite belong there. Over the next few days, Lucy's connection with Tommy deepened. She'd sit for hours in front of the mirror, talking and laughing. When Emily, Lucy's mother, asked her about it, Lucy simply replied, "Tommy tells me funny stories." Emily and James exchanged amused glances, dismissing it as harmless make-believe. But one evening, as James tucked Lucy into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, Tommy said he doesn't like being alone in the dark." James felt a chill run down his spine. Trying to stay calm, he kissed her forehead and assured her, "You're never alone, sweetheart. Mommy and I are always here." As he turned off the light and closed the door, James couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching from the mirror. Over the following weeks, subtle changes began to ripple through the household. Lucy's once joyful games with Tommy grew quieter, more secretive. She often whispered to the mirror, her words too soft for James or Emily to hear. When asked, Lucy would simply smile and say, "Tommy doesn't like it when I tell grown-ups our secrets." James couldn't help but feel uneasy. One afternoon, as he worked in his home office, he heard Lucy giggling from her room. The sound was cheerful, but there was something unnerving about Ita's high-pitched echo that didn't quite match Lucy's voice. He walked to her door and peeked inside. She was sitting cross-legged in front of the mirror, her head tilted as though listening intently. "Everything okay, kiddo?" James asked, stepping into the room. Lucy turned to him, her face lighting up. "Tommy wants you to play with us," she said, patting the spot beside her. James smiled nervously, sitting down. "What are we playing?" he asked, glancing at his reflection. But as he looked closer, he could have sworn he saw something of faint shadow moving in the corner of the mirror. Lucy grinned and said, "Tommy says we're playing hide and seek, but he's really good at hiding." James laughed it off, but his stomach churned. Something about the mirror felt oppressive, as though it were watching him. That evening, while cleaning up after dinner, Emily called James into the kitchen. "Have you noticed Lucy acting different lately?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. James nodded, explaining the strange games with Tommy. Emily frowned. "She told me Tommy said we shouldn't move the mirror. Why would she say that?" James shrugged, but decided to investigate. That night, after Lucy had gone to bed, he returned to her room. The mirror loomed large in the dim light, its golden frame casting eerie shadows on the walls. He approached it cautiously, placing his hand against the cold glass. For a moment, he felt nothing. But then, a chill ran through his body, and he pulled his hand back instinctively. The next morning, Lucy seemed unusually quiet. She refused her usual pancakes and stared out the window, her hands clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Tommy's sad," she said softly when Emily asked what was wrong. "He says he misses his home." "Where's his home, sweetie?" Emily asked gently. Lucy hesitated, then whispered, "Inside the mirror." James, overhearing, felt a wave of unease. That evening, as they put Lucy to bed, she clung tightly to James. "Daddy, Tommy said he's mad at you," she whispered. "Why is he mad?" James asked, his voice steady despite his unease. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "Because you touched the mirror. He doesn't like that." James and Emily exchanged worried glances. Something was deeply wrong, and it seemed to revolve around the mirror. That night, James resolved to take action. Whatever was happening to Lucy, he couldn't ignore it any longer. James couldn't sleep that night. The words Lucy had whispered replayed in his mind like a broken record. "Tommy said he's mad at you." Lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. Around midnight, he decided to research the mirror's history. He retrieved his laptop and began searching through old family photos, documents, and anything that might provide a clue. The mirror had belonged to James's grandmother, Evelyn, a woman known for her eccentric tastes and love for antiques. Evelyn had passed away when James was a child, leaving behind only fragmented memories of her stern demeanor and quiet house filled with peculiar items. Among them was the mirror, which had always seemed out of place in her otherwise quaint home. As James scrolled through digital archives and old family records, he stumbled upon a newspaper article from the 1940s. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearances Linked to Antique Shop Fire." The article detailed a tragic fire that had destroyed a small antique shop in Portland. According to witnesses, several items had been salvaged, but the shop owner and a young boy her grandson were never found. James felt a chill crawl up his spine as he read further. The shop had specialized in rare and unusual artifacts, and the mirror was listed among the salvaged item. Could it be the same mirror now sitting in Lucy's room? Determined to learn more, James reached out to his mother, Patricia, who lived in a neighboring town. "Mom," he said over the phone, "what do you know about Grandma Evelyn's mirror?" Patricia hesitated. "That mirror. Evelyn always said it was special," she replied. She claimed it had been a gift from someone important, but she never explained who. James pressed further, but Patricia admitted she didn't know much else. "All I remember is that she never let anyone touch it. She said it wasn't safe." The words sent a shiver down James's spine. What exactly had his grandmother meant? The next day, James decided to move the mirror out of Lucy's room. He waited until she was at school, carefully lifting the heavy object and carrying it to the attic. As he set it down, the glass seemed to shimmer briefly, as though something behind it was moving. James shook his head, convincing himself it was just his imagination. When Lucy returned home, she immediately noticed the absence of the mirror. Her reaction was swift and alarming. "Where's Tommy?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. "I want my mirror back." Emily tried to comfort her, but Lucy's sobs turned into screams. That evening, the house seemed heavier, the air thick with tension. Lucy refused to eat dinner, retreating to her room and slamming the door. James and Emily sat in silence, their unease growing with every passing minute. At midnight, James woke to a strange sound, a faint tapping noise echoing through the house. He followed the noise to the attic, where the mirror stood covered by an old sheet. As he approached, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. His heart pounded as he reached for the sheet, pulling it away. The mirror's surface was cold, but something stirred beneath its shadows, twisting and shifting like restless figures trapped behind the glass. James stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. Whatever this mirror was, it wasn't just a family heirloom. It was something far darker, and it wasn't going to let them go so easily. James stood frozen, staring at the mirror's swirling shadows. He couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching him from the other side. The tapping sound grew louder, almost rhythmic, as if beckoning him closer. But he couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at him to run, yet a deep curiosity held him in place. "James?" Emily's voice broke through the silence. She had climbed up to the attic, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. "What are you doing up here?" she asked, her eyes darting to the uncovered mirror. James turned to her, his face pale. "There's something wrong with this mirror," he said. "I think it's alive." Emily stared at him, then at the mirror. "It's just a mirror, James," she said, though her voice wavered. But as she stepped closer, she too felt the air grow colder, and the shadows behind the glass seemed to shift in response to her presence. "What is this thing?" she whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. Desperate for answers, James decided to search the attic for any old documents or items that might explain the mirror's origins. He rummaged through boxes, finding faded photographs and yellowed letters. Finally, he uncovered a leather-bound journal that belonged to Evelyn. Its brittle pages were filled with cryptic notes and sketches of the mirror. One entry caught his attention. Evelyn had written about acquiring the mirror from an estate sale. She described how the seller had warned her that it was cursed, claiming it once belonged to a reclusive family whose son disappeared after spending hours staring into it. Evelyn dismissed the warning as superstition and brought the mirror home, only to experience strange occurrences herself. She wrote about voices, James said, reading aloud to Emily. Whispers coming from the mirror late at night. And she believed it was connected to a boy's spirit trapped inside. Emily gasped. "Tommy," she murmured. James nodded grimly. The next entry was more chilling. Evelyn had tried to destroy the mirror, but every attempt failed. "It won't break," she had written. "And when I try to get rid of it, it always finds its way back." The journal ended abruptly, leaving James and Emily with more questions than answers. Determined to protect Lucy, they decided to remove the mirror from the house entirely. They wrapped it tightly in sheets and carried it to the car. As they drove to a remote location, the atmosphere inside the car grew tense. James glanced in the rearview mirror and swore he saw a face staring back at him, pale, with hollow eyes. When they arrived at a secluded lake, they carried the mirror to the water's edge. Emily hesitated, her grip tightening. "Are we sure about this?" she asked. James nodded, his jaw set. "It has to go." Together, they heaved the mirror into the lake, watching as it sank beneath the surface. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the water began to ripple violently, as though something beneath the surface was struggling to escape. Emily grabbed James's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What have we done?" she whispered. The ripples stilled, and the lake became eerily calm. Relieved but shaken, they returned home, hoping they had finally rid themselves of the mirror's curse. James and Emily returned home that night, feeling a fragile sense of relief. The mirror was gone, and for the first time in days, the house felt normal again. Lucy, though still upset about the absence of her friend, had calmed down enough to fall asleep. James tucked her in, brushing her hair gently. "It's over now," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The couple settled into the living room, exhausted but hopeful. Emily turned on the TV, trying to distract herself from the unsettling events of the past few days. James sat silently, staring at the fireplace, his thoughts still lingering on the journal's ominous warnings. "Do you think it's really gone?" Emily asked hesitantly. James nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure. Around midnight, the calm shattered. A loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of shattering glass. James and Emily froze, their hearts pounding in unison. "Lucy!" Emily cried, bolting up the stairs with James close behind her. When they reached Lucy's room, their blood ran cold. The mirror was back. It stood in its usual spot, its surface pristine despite the sound of breaking glass. Lucy was sitting in front of it, whispering softly as though in conversation. Her reflection seemed distorted, her face elongated, her eyes darker than they should be. "Lucy!" James shouted, rushing to pull her away from the mirror. She resisted, screaming and clawing at his arm. "No, he's going to be mad," she wailed. Emily joined in, helping to restrain their daughter. Finally, they managed to pull her away, but the moment they did, the mirror's surface rippled like water, and a low growl emanated from it. James and Emily locked the door to Lucy's room, vowing not to let her near the mirror again. They sat in the hallway, holding a trembling Lucy between them. "How is this possible?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James shook his head. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we need help." The next day, James reached out to a local historian who specialized in the occult. Dr. Margaret Hill was an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. When James described the mirror and its history, her expression darkened. "You should have never brought that mirror into your home," she said bluntly. "Objects like that don't just carry history, they carry attachments." Dr. Hill explained that the mirror likely served as a conduit for spirits, particularly those with unfinished business or malicious intent. "It's not just cursed," she said. "It's a prison for something or someone who wants out." James and Emily exchanged uneasy glances. "Is there any way to stop it?" James asked. Dr. Hill hesitated. "The only way to break a connection like this is to sever its tie to the living," she said. "But that's easier said than done. You'll need to confront whatever is trapped inside and banish it." That night, James and Emily prepared for what felt like an impossible task. Armed with instructions from Dr. Hill, they gathered candles, salt, and an ancient chant meant to expel spirits. The mirror awaited them, its surface unnervingly calm, as if it knew what they were planning. James and Emily stood in front of the mirror, the air in the room thick with tension. Lucy clung to her mother, still too afraid to move. The mirror seemed to watch them, its surface like a darkened window into another world. With every second that passed, the room grew colder, and the low hum of whispered voices filled the air, sending chills down their spine. "Are you ready?" James asked, his voice barely audible over the oppressive silence. Emily nodded, though fear was written all over her face. They had no choice, this had to end tonight. They began the ritual, placing salt in a protective circle around the mirror and lighting the candles. As they chanted the ancient words, the air seemed to grow heavier, pressing in on them from all sides. The whispers grew louder, now unmistakably forming words, though their meaning was unintelligible. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled violently, as if something was trying to break free from within. "Look out!" Emily cried, pulling Lucy back as the mirror's frame began to twist and warp. The once plain glass seemed to shift, becoming opaque and frosted over. The shadows behind it moved unnaturally, and a figure began to materialize, its face a distorted blur of anguish and rage. James's heart raced, but he didn't stop chanting. He felt a sudden pressure on his chest, as though the very weight of the mirror's power was suffocating him. The figure in the glass was now clear, a gaunt, skeletal man with hollow, glowing eyes. His mouth opened, releasing an agonizing scream that shook the very walls of the room. The shadowy figure clawed at the glass, as though trying to reach through and grab them. Emily gasped, clutching Lucy to her chest as the figure's fingers pressed against the surface, leaving behind streaks of blackened ash. "It's not just a spirit," Emily screamed. "It's something worse. It's pure malice." James pushed forward, his voice growing louder and more desperate as he recited the final words of the chant. The figure in the mirror screeched, its hands scraping against the glass with horrifying intensity. The temperature dropped even further, and James could see his breath fogging up in front of him. But he held his ground. In one final surge of energy, the mirror cracked. A thunderous crack echoed through the house, shaking the foundations, as the figure in the glass let out a last agonizing scream. The crack spread quickly, and within moments, the entire mirror shattered, sending shards of glass flying across the room. James and Emily flinched, shielding their eyes from the rain of broken glass. But the figure was gone. For a long moment, there was only silence. James, Emily, and Lucy stood frozen, staring at the wreckage of the mirror. The air was no longer cold. The whispers had stopped. The sense of something malevolent watching them had vanished. It was over. But James couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare wasn't completely gone. The mirror might have been destroyed, but something somehow still lingered in the corners of his mind. As they looked around the room, they noticed something unsettling. The faint outline of a face, still reflected in the shards of glass scattered across the floor. It was the same face, the same hollow, glowing eyes. The curse might have been broken, but the reflection never truly left. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more chilling and mysterious tales like this one, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep bringing you content like this. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. Share it with your friends who love a good mystery, and let us know in the comments what you thought about this story. See you next time.